You guys be reacting to Tales of Old World's video about tracing the line of the elites itself, so let's get into it.
There have been many groups that were obsessed with keeping their bloodline pure, and many of them still do this to this day to some degree. But in ancient times,
Keeping the bloodline pure is synonymous for like inbreeding and fucking incest and fucking shit.
and even up to just a few hundred years ago, it was taken very seriously. All the way back to the beginning of human history, the people who ruled over us were all from a specific genetic lineage. And this is still true to a large part today. Not just today's monarchs, but also many leaders of nations, including American presidents, can trace their lineage back to this royal bloodline. But what is this bloodline? And why have humans been so obsessed with it? And who exactly does it originate with? They themselves actually tell us. They literally believe to this day that they are the descendants of the old gods from mythology. And because of this divine origin, they are the ones meant to rule over the rest of us. At least that's what they believe. And they won't publicly say this, but it's what their fathers and
This is like a bloodline of the Nephilim itself.
grandfathers taught them as children. That's why they call themselves the elites, because they believe they're genetically better than the rest of humanity. But it gets deeper than that. Not only do they say they are descended from ancient gods and demigods, but some of these royal families literally believe they are descended from what are depicted in ancient art as serpent beings and dragons.
Yeah, we all know who the fucking serpent or dragons are.
Whether they think this is real
We all know what they represent in biblical theology.
or metaphorical is up for debate, but that's what their ancestors say in the historical texts that have survived. This is where that whole reptilian theory comes from. But I don't think these people are really shapeshifters or half reptile or anything like that. But they
Yeah, if you believe in certain shit like the reptilian theory, you're just half that retarded, like. But the meaning insinuated for reptilians, like they come from like they're cold-blooded, like they're like satanic. That's what they meaning insinuates. But conspiracy theorists are like changed that shit into like different uh rabbit hole of like absurdity and retardedness.
are descended from what are described as divine and semi-divine beings, who for some reason are depicted as serpents. Let's look into each of these stories and try to find some answers. Alright, I usually like to start with what's believed to be the oldest, the Mesopotamian civilizations and the Fertile Crescent. An archaeologist in 1906, deep in the deserts of Iraq, found a list of Sumerian kings written in cuneiform that tells us who ruled all the way back to the beginning. Except that their beginning goes back much, much earlier than our version of the story.
Yeah, because our history is fucking like edited and fucking like changed, to represent this modern naturalistic narrative. Like
Goes back tens of thousands of years.
this is a Sumerian kings list, and you can see the timeline of the kings actually that lived. Totally contradictory to our modern naturalistic timeline.
To a time when gods ruled. The list starts with the pre-flood era. Before the flood of Utnapishtim, there were 8 kings who ruled over 5 cities, over a period of 241,000 years, each ruling for about 20 to 40,000 years, and descending from the gods themselves, even living alongside them in some of the myths. Later rulers that we know of, like Gilgamesh, were said to be descended from these people as well. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, it says he was 2/3 god and only 1/3 human. And there were a few rulers after him that claimed this as well, but then the power shifted hands and the divine bloodline was lost in Mesopotamia, and later kings never claimed to be descended from these gods like Gilgamesh did. They would just say their rule was divinely chosen, rather than in their blood. But other civilizations had this same story of divine descent, but they actually claimed to have preserved these genes from the gods. In Egypt, we find a similar story. They too have an ancient kings list, and theirs began with the gods themselves. The god Osiris and his son Horus were the first 2 pharaohs, and the later kings claimed descent from these gods as well. They claim that lineage survived all the way into the Roman times, with Cleopatra VII, who many don't realize was extremely inbred for this exact purpose. But after her, the record of that bloodline was lost as well.
Yeah, the whole fucking Egyptian like kings and shit, like they're a fucking bunch of fucking inbreds. Like honestly, like if you actually look at the history, that there's like a lot of incest and fucking shit, and people being kings actually being born with deformities and fucking shit. I forgot the example. There was one dude like
She had a son, but he was executed by Augustus Caesar when he was only 17, so it's believed that the line ended there. However, there are some stories of earlier Egyptian royal families departing from Egypt during other times of conflict. One story from the Irish and Scottish lore claims that an Egyptian queen escaped to Scotland after the invasion from the Sea People and began civilization there. There's not really a way to verify this, but many people, including the locals, believe this to this day. and there are some weird similarities between Gaelic and Egyptian civilization that people point out when talking about this theory. So maybe this is where the Scottish or Irish royal family came from, but more on that in a minute. We'll come back to Europe because the modern European royal families tie heavily into this. But for now, let's go east to India, where royals live not as leaders of nations.
I always believe like royal families and like in the oligarchy and those kind of lineages, like believe or some people in the past would accumulate huge amounts of wealth itself. I always believe that narrative. It's all about money, but then you know when you actually like heard a lot about conspiracy and all that shit, like then my mindset actually shifted. Oh, these were like there's something like satanic or metaphysical to their claim of their royal lineage itself. Like I thought all this shit was about money and accumulating power, like accumulation of money, but it's all about, a satanic control, like and control of people, satisfaction gained from controlling other people. Like that's what all stems down to.
But of commerce, and don't run the country, but live as billionaires. Most of these families, as well as many who have historically been in the upper caste of Indian society, claim descent from semi-divine Vedic heroes, Rama and Krishna, both avatars of Vishnu. But there are some families and tribes who claim their ancestors weren't descended from these heroes, but they came from the Nagas, the serpent beings in Hindu mythology, a race of people said to be either part serpent in form or fully human, and associated heavily with serpent symbolism. And it's not only in India where we find this claim. In Southeast Asia, modern-day Thailand and Cambodia, they have the Devraja, or God Kings. They also claim descent from gods like Shiva and Vishnu. The modern royal family of Thailand actually claims direct descent from Rama. But others, the Khmer kings, notably the ones who created Angkor Wat, claim descent from the Nagas, and you can see all the serpent symbolism in their art and architecture. But they too were eventually dethroned and their lineage lost. Some say it still survives in the modern-day Cambodian royal family.
It's hard to actually prove their lineage. Like a lot of fucking shit can happen in history itself. Like,
but it also might have been completely lost hundreds of years ago. In Vietnam, their founding rulers are said to have descended from a dragon and a mountain fairy who sired 100 sons and daughters. 50 went to the mountains and 50 to the sea. And their written record states that these were the ruling dynasties of Vietnam. The modern-day Vietnamese royal family lost power in the 19th century, but their descendants do still survive to this day. Although they don't hold any power or wealth, they do still exist and live as normal people, but their lineage can be traced back to these first people descended from a dragon. In China, they have a similar story. Like many of these places, there have been changing dynasties in China over thousands of years, so lineage to modern royal families from the ancient ones may not even exist anymore. But it does exist in the minds of the elites, so remember that, because in China especially, we had changing power many times since the first dynasty. Today's Chinese royals do exist, but again they live as normal people with special genealogy. They lost power in 1912, but they're still out there, and their fathers and grandfathers claim to be descended from the first kings of China, the 5 divine emperors or sages, who were accompanied by the 3 sovereigns, semi-divine snake beings, kind of like the Nagas in India.
what the fuck?
And the 5 emperors had some heavy dragon symbolism associated with them as well.
This is how you actually have sex if you're half snake and half fucking man.
The throne the first kings passed down was literally called the Dragon Throne. Some say these emperors were descendants of the dragons themselves, because in many artworks they were given serpent-like features. And similarly to Europe, we find the dragon depicted in many of their family crests and totems. And in Japan we find an even clearer picture, because Japan has the oldest continuing hereditary monarchy in the world. They claim to have preserved their original royal line since their gods lived, and they claim direct descent from Amaterasu, the sun goddess. But in their story, they aren't descendants of dragons like we find in Vietnam and China, but they are descendants of a dragon slayer. This is also common in many cultures, especially in Europe. In Japan, the story goes that the goddess Amaterasu had a brother, Susanoo, who slayed the great dragon Yamada no Orochi. And when he...
Bro, we all see Naruto, and it's so crazy to find actually where this words actually came from.
He found a magical sword embedded in the tail of the dragon. He and his sister Amaterasu took this sword along with the sacred mirror of truth and the jewel of benevolence, and gifted it to the grandson of the sun goddess, who was to travel from the heavenly realms to the earth to rule Japan. These divine gifts were passed down to his grandson, the first emperor of Japan, and are said to still be in the possession of the current emperor today. But no one other than he himself is allowed to look at these items. Even during ceremonies, they leave the boxes holding these items closed. Some say they don't even exist anymore, and it's all for show, which could be true. But if they are real, the sword in legend is said to have power to control the wind and weather. The mirror is said to reveal
Yeah, I highly doubt that.
the person's true heart or intentions, and some even claims it contains the spirit of Amaterasu herself, and it's possible to communicate with her through it. And the jewel is said to calm or harmonize divine energies, but no one's ever allowed to see them, if they still exist at all, except for the Emperor. There's one legend that the sword was lost in a shipwreck during transportation in the 19th century, so maybe it's possible to go out and find this divine weapon, if someone hasn't already done so in secret. Anyway, so if we travel over to the Americas, we can find the same legends. The Maya believe something I find very similar to the Hindu world, with the story of the Nagas. They have a myth found in the Popol Vuh of two twin heroes who founded their civilization, and who their lineage of kings descended from. These twin
The Aztec mythology and the Mayas and fucking shit, like, it's super crazy if you actually, like, look into it. Like, they had some funny names for fucking gods and shit, like...
brothers were born of semi-divine parents, making them demigods. The main myth associated with them is their descent to the underworld, where they defeated the lords of Xibalba, the gods of the underworld, who can often be seen with this serpent imagery, just like we find in the stories of the underworld in other cultures, just like the Nagas of India. The Aztec and Toltec had a different story. Many of their noble families claimed lineage from their deified emperor, Topiltzin Quetzalcoatl, who was the feathered serpent god incarnated in human form. The story goes that Quetzalcoatl's mother was a virgin priestess who, in ritual, swallowed a jade bead, a symbol of life and sacred essence in Mesoamerican thought.
Yo.
This caused her to miraculously conceive a son. It's believed that the god Mixcoatl, the cloud serpent, seen as the Milky Way in the sky, was responsible for this miraculous conception, and thus he imbued the spirit of his son, the feathered serpent, into this human child of a virgin priestess. Weirdly similar to Christian traditions all the way over in ancient Mexico. But yet many noble families in the Toltec and Aztec culture would claim this serpent god in human form was their ancestor, thus keeping this lineage alive, and who knows what happened to it today. It's possible this lineage still exists among certain Mexican families. And of course, some of these symbols we find in ancient Mexico, we can also find in the family crest of European royals.
Imagine if you're born a child and fucking during Mayan civilization or during the time of Aztecs and shit, like, when you fucking sacrifice to a fucking dragon and fucking snake. Like, imagine, you know, during those times, you know. Like, I'm not gladly, but a lot of people say, you know, the Native Americans, all that shit, like, they were, like, injustice wiped out, but, like, they're doing some fucked up shit, like, during that time. Like, they're sacrificing children to fucking rain gods and fucking shit, like. So, you guys justified that, but not, you know, colonization as a scheme.
So, the European royal families are pretty complex. Their lineages have basically all crossed through intermarrying, so they're all related to each other in some form or another, as well as many of the kings and heroes in medieval stories. So let's just focus on the most famous of them, the British royal family. That being said, the royal families do still exist in a handful of other European countries, the Netherlands, Norway, Denmark, Spain, and Belgium to name a few.
It would make sense the royal families actually believe they're descendants from this Nephilim or, like, fallen angels, like. But I highly, like, actually doubt that, but to maintain a consistent lineage. Just a lot of things crazy shit can happen in history too. Like, people can fake their lineage at this point. Like, who fucking knows what happened during that time?
Again, all of these families are related in some way or another. But in the line of King Charles in particular, it's been documented that he has some pretty interesting ancestors. First off, he descends from European heroes, such as Charlemagne, William the Conqueror, El-Cid, Robert the Bruce, and even King Arthur if the legends are based on a real person. But there's more. It's well documented and widely known that he's also a descendant of Vlad the Impaler, the inspiration for Bram Stoker's Dracula. And Vlad's father, Vlad II, was known to have been a member of the Order of the Dragon, or Society of the Dragonists, a group of crusader knights sworn to fight off enemies of Christianity. He took the title of Dracul, meaning dragon, leading to Vlad the Impaler, his son, later being nicknamed Draculaea, meaning son of dragon. Hold on though, because
as long as your opinions as Vlad the Impaler, like, Vlad the Impaler was pretty fucking cool if you actually think about it. Like, he was a berserker.
Doesn't stop there. The British royal families also claim lineage to Woden, the Germanic god, thought to have been a real person that was deified into Germanic and Norse religion, being the same as Odin in Nordic myth. And I'm not even saying this is legit or I believe this, but this is just what they say themselves. This is what these families and noble groups have believed since the Middle Ages. They trace it through the line of Alfred the Great. And Woden wasn't necessarily a benevolent god either. He's well known for being a cruel god of war, who only watches the actions of humanity so he can pick the best warriors to battle with him someday against the opposing gods when Ragnarok eventually comes. He's a war god in essence, but he's also tied into all sorts of mysticism and occult beliefs. That's who these royals say they're descended from. This claim is also held by the Norwegian royal families. It's most commonly held that Woden was based on some Indo-European conqueror. Based on the DNA and migration evidence, most likely came from somewhere in the steppe region, to the east, and migrated into northern Europe. It's here where they came into contact with the very ancient Germanic people, assimilating with them and taking over their ancient religion, placing their king, Odin, or Woden, as the new deity. It is here during World War II that the Germans thought they had found the secret to this bloodline. You see, they believed that these early Germanics, who were here before Odin, came from Atlantis. They thought that Atlantis was the home of the sacred bloodline, what they called the Aryans. And it was due to this mixing of blood with lesser lines that led to the condemnation of the island of Atlantis, and the pure bloodline to find refuge in Germany, eventually conquering all the way across Europe into Asia. The Nazis took this to mean that the Aryans, or Germanic peoples, were the pure bloodline, what they called the Übermensch. And a surprising amount of royals in Europe went along with these ideas during that time. A shameful amount. Like, they don't mention these names ever again sort of situation. But it happened. Because they too thought they were part of this Übermensch, this sacred bloodline, the Atlanteans. The Atlanteans in the Greek myths were descended from the god Poseidon, so they literally believed they came from a god as well. British myth also tells us that the founder of Britain was the grandson of a demigod Aeneas of Troy, son of Aphrodite. His grandson's name was Brutus, and the legend goes that after the fall of Troy, he and a small group sailed to the British Isles, giving it its name, and founding its first settlement in London, naming it New Troy. This story comes to us from Geoffrey of Monmouth's 12th century history of the kings of Britain. I'll link the full text below and add it to our book list if you want to check that out for yourself. It is thought by historians to be myth, but it makes the claim that these royals of today are directly descended from Brutus as well as King Arthur. So, the British royal families and these other European royals believe they are a mashup of heroes, gods, and demigods. This also ties into a lot of the US presidents' lineage, as many of them have also been shown to be descended from European royals. There's a few more to mention in specific. The old Irish kings claim to be descendants from the Tuatha De Danann, the mythical godlike race of semi-divine beings from Irish lore. The ancient Greeks claimed ancestors from gods and demigods as well. The Spartans with Heracles, the dragon slayer, and the first kings of Athens, Cecrops, a half-man, half-serpent. We also have the story of Cadmus, the founder of Thebes, who was a
What the fuck actually happened at that time? We got this fucking like animal-human hybrids of this shit. Like, a lot of people say it's mythology, but I consistently believe, these claims because, ancient historians like Pliny the Elder, like Herodotus, like they all like in their historians, actual historians, and they recorded the instances of these kinds of creatures itself. So these were actually real historians. Would they make that shit up also? Like, and there's very consistent records of like these kinds of creatures that existed, possibly during the medieval times also. Like, what the fuck actually happened during those times?
demigod, the grandson of Poseidon, of Phoenician descent, slew a dragon and was instructed by Athena to sow the teeth of the dragon into the soil. These dragon teeth became the founding warriors of Thebes, and Cadmus' sister Europa was where we get the term Europe. And then, according to Herodotus, the Scythians were descended from the offspring of Heracles and a serpent-legged goddess. Again, basically the exact same thing as the Nagas from India. The tribes of West Africa, including the Dogon tribe, believe they descend from an ancestral snake god, which they call the rainbow serpent.
Damn. Is everyone's descended from a fucking snake?
This can also be found in voodoo religions across Africa and the Caribbean. And all the way in Australia, they too worship what is translated as a rainbow serpent. And then even deep in the Amazon rainforest, we can find local religions that have been locked in isolations for thousands of years, who believe their original ancestor was an anaconda, or boa snake.
What the fuck?
In biblical lore, these offspring are said to have come from the sons of God and the daughters of man. Based on the writings in Genesis and the Book of Enoch, God sent down a group of angels to watch over humanity, but they strayed from their original objective and took on human wives, siring children who were said to be part divine and were said in Genesis to be these heroes of myth and legend, and many of them were also giant in stature. This was why God had to send the flood to make an attempt at removing this bloodline from our genealogy. But it clearly shows in the Old Testament that some from this Nephilim line survived after the flood. It says that some of them became the tribe called Anakim, where it says the giant Goliath descended from. This is why many Jews and Christians say God commanded the Israelites to eliminate all the people in these groups, because they were from this demonic bloodline that would taint the sacred lineage of the lion. You see, something a lot of people don't realize is the Bible is actually largely about protecting a sacred bloodline that begins with Adam and goes through figures like Noah, Abraham, David, Solomon, and eventually Jesus. There are some fringe groups that believe the line continued through Jesus and Mary Magdalene, but this belief is pretty controversial and unverifiable. But the line did branch off from Solomon and continue
Yeah, I don't believe those. Is
in the African nation of Ethiopia. The story goes that the Queen of Sheba, around 950 BC, visited King Solomon, and they sired a child together, Menelik I, who became the first emperor of Ethiopia. And his 225th successor, Haile Selassie, was the last king of Ethiopia until 1974, when they were overthrown. However, his children survived, and the line continues in exile to this day. There's another bloodline mentioned in biblical lore as well, the cursed line of the Antichrist. It's believed that he will come from a specific tribe, the tribe that was cursed for their immorality and idolatry, left out of the gathering of saints from all the tribes during the end times, the tribe of Dan. It's believed that the Antichrist himself will descend from this group. The tribe of Dan was one of the lost tribes, sent away in exile after the Assyrian invasion. Their symbol was the snake wrapped around the balance.
Whoa.
During the height of the kingdom of Israel, they occupied the northernmost territory. And when they were exiled, it's believed they went north from there. But then they were completely lost to mainstream history. But I think we can easily track them based on the names of certain regions throughout Europe. You see, whenever the tribe of Dan would take over a city, they would rename it after Dan. And we can trace this name all the way up from the Middle East into Europe, and eventually settling somewhere in Northern Europe. Most likely Denmark, the Danes.
Isn't that insane? That's where Denmark actually comes from.
They traveled up through the Black Sea, up the Danube River, Dnieper River, Don and Dniester River, founding cities like Donetsk, Ukraine, possibly even being responsible for the mythical Celtic stories of the Tuatha De Danann, eventually becoming the Anglo-Saxon groups that inhabited Northern Europe, the ancestors of all European royal families. Thank you guys for watching.
Damn, that's crazy.